Pranamda, I'm Ben Burggraaf, and I'm in my day-to-day working life. I have the pleasure of leading Net Zero Industry Wales, but this afternoon I also have the pleasure of chairing this panel session. I'm joined in this virtual panel today by Andy Ross, Benga Adenaki, and Chris Vauxhall, and I will ask them to introduce themselves later on after I've done my introduction. I still hear some feedback. Perhaps Andy, Benga, could you go on mute and see maybe something is actually in your individual microphones that's coming through? It's much better now. Thank you. Um, Wales has the potential to establish itself as a clean energy transition hub and remain a cornerstone of the UK industrial base, building on a strength which is as a major energy producer, as well as a country that produces high value goods and services, not for the last couple of decades, but actually for over a century. Um, I've had the pleasure of working with the South Wales Industrial Cluster and also with the North East Wales Industrial Decarbonisation Cluster, and have presented about this in previous Wales Climate Weeks. And we've developed actually really clear decarbonisation pathways for industry in the power, but also manufacturing sectors. And there's a significant role for all the different technology levers, whether it's hydrogen, carbon capture storage, energy resource efficiency, but also CCS to help and decarbonize industry. Um, we are independent, as Net Zero Industry Wales, an independent private sector partnership that supports Wales industry on the journey to net zero, and would like to ensure that Wales becomes the country of choice for producing sustainable goods and services. But it's not only up to industry alone to help to decarbonize Wales. It's a significant chunk. So the power and manufacturing sector in total equates to roughly 50% of the total carbon footprint of Wales. But there are also other sectors that play a really key role in reducing emissions. And we need to do that in tandem with economic growth and with our communities, clearly. Um, and therefore, I think in this particular article panel today, we will explore some of those key aspects about cross-sectoral kind of working together and opportunities, as well as working closely with our communities. And the latter is very important because the exact route to net zero isn't clear and will be different for every individual business and person. So there is no silver bullet. Let that be clear. There's no silver bullet in reaching net zero and combating climate change. It requires further innovation to ensure that the right solutions are developed for each application at the right cost to remain globally cost competitive. And this particularly really is important in the current cost of living crisis, where the journey to net zero is perceived to be, I think, really affecting further cost of living across our economy. But also requires the buy-in and action of every person in Wales. And we should see this really primarily as a large cultural challenge, which we want to do a lot in a very short period of time. And we don't have a century to sort this out. We have to do this in a decade or a couple of decades. So we really need to make sure that everybody has buys into this kind of journey itself. So today's theme and also of the kind of Wales Climate Week has been about enabling the people of Wales to deliver and benefit from the net zero transition in the next carbon budget 2026 to 2030, but also beyond. And in this session, we aim to stimulate a bit of a discussion around that, how we can do that, really outlining what might be preventing innovation and skills development for people, for example, to participate and feel more empowered to be part of that journey, overcome solutions to these barriers, because it's very easy to talk about what's not working, and I think sometimes it's more difficult to explore the solutions. So what I'm really keen to hear from the panelists today is also what might be the solutions in this space, and what support is available and sometimes also missing to transition to net zero and create that businesses and individuals feel empowered to play their own part in delivering net zero. Before I go to the panelists, please don't forget to ask any questions and post any questions in the Q&A and in the chat bots on the right-hand side. Hopefully you've attended other sessions where you've already done that. I will be monitoring that during this particular session, and hopefully when there's a relevant question coming in, I will basically post that in and get one of the panelists to answer your question. So let's get started with the discussion then. Um, Andy, firstly, you, as the founder and director of the Center of Energy Equality, can you please introduce yourself to the audience and explain what the Center of Energy Equality actually does, and really focusing on perhaps some of the key points I raised earlier about how do we empower people to participate, perhaps in this journey to net zero?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Ben, and pleased to meet everyone virtually. So, yeah, as you say, I'm Andy Ross, founder and director at Centre for Energy Equality. So, we are a social enterprise dedicated to ensuring that the low carbon energy transition or net zero energy transition is fair and accessible for everyone. And as you say, Ben, it's impossible to have an energy transition of any type and with it only being accessible by people with money, finances, big businesses participating. Everybody has to be able to be involved and benefit from the net zero transition. Otherwise, well, firstly, it would be unjust and unfair. But secondly, it just won't happen without everybody being literally every household across Wales and beyond being able to participate. So our role in that transition is providing that representation and advocacy on behalf of more marginalised groups who perhaps are not necessarily engaged with net zero and the energy sector more widely, and trying to come up with innovative solutions to enabling people to engage, and also whilst tackling challenges around energy affordability, vulnerability, disability, and other reasons why people might not necessarily be as involved as they either want to be or from a net zero perspective need to be. So we'll probably come on to it in a little bit more detail, but we've been doing a lot of work in Mid Wales with the Growing Mid Wales partnership around ensuring rural communities and farming communities in Mid Wales can benefit from local renewables, for example, by ensuring that community benefits are baked into renewable generation, and that more of the energy can be stored and used locally. But I won't go into all that detail right now. But thanks, Ben.
No, I think it's maybe good to bring it a bit to life, Andy. I think could you explain? Can you give a specific example of a project where this all comes to life? Talk about it in specifically. What was the project there to do? How big is it, and what it achieved to date? Maybe perhaps so that brings it a bit to life, I guess, to the audience.
Yeah, of course. So, a project in Mid Wales, which is funded by Growing Mid Wales Partnership, so between Diwydiant and Paris councils. It's called Harvest. It's a very long acronym, so it's Holistic Agricultural and Rural Virtual Energy System Transition, but I won't say that again. Harvest, and what that is all about is trying to make low carbon technologies such as batteries and solar systems accessible for communities within a community benefit model where those benefits are shared both for households and businesses more widely. Um, so we are delivering the demonstration phase of that project at the moment between now and April next year, where we have we're working with a large solar installation and installing an additional battery at actually a landfill site in some agricultural land on the outskirts of Llanidloes. We're also working with the local cricket club and school, and also domestic properties where we have lots of solar and battery installed, and operating that as basically a virtual energy system, or sometimes the phrase virtual power plant or VPP is used. So basically what that means is the local generation from the fairly large solar installation can be traded and stored in the batteries in people's homes and at the cricket club and used by the heat pumps, uh, ra- um, rather than purely being exported to the grid. And because when the power is exported to the grid, and this could be wind, it could be solar, often it is the case that that energy is mainly being utilized by higher demand centers such as the big cities, whether it's going off to, it's obviously electrons, it's going through the grid and being used by data centers maybe. But what this enables is through virtually that energy to be used locally, and because it's not traveling so far and it's using the distribution infrastructure, it's helping with grid constraints, and SP Energy networks will pay a contribution to based on helping them with grid constraints, and it's also not using the transmission infrastructure, reducing the need for transmission infrastructure, which helps with visual impact, but also most importantly brings down cost. And then an additional, we're working on the business model around that, because this is bringing in lots of benefits. It's also an investable business model, so there's a lot of savings to be made, and the difference between the savings on bills and the savings on and the electricity and the sort of what the electricity costs would have been, there is a gap, and some of that gap can be used to return funds to investors organised by a non-profit community cooperative, or we're working on exactly what that organisation looks like. And then the engagement to get people involved is all working with, in this case, Llanidloes Futures, which are a local community group, and who are involved, and they're people living in the town, and know the people. So it's all through local trusted intermediaries, which is really, really important.
I'm just on mute myself now. So Andy, quick question. You talked about the energy cost savings. Just the last question for you. What have you typically have seen through that project on cost saving, percentage wise, or even in pounds wise?
Yeah. So the actual difference in your energy bill from having solar and battery can typically cut your bills by nearly half. So that's on average around about an £800 saving. But what that doesn't take into account is, of course, the cost of the infrastructure in the first place. But still, that gives, so just looking at it from a single house perspective, the upfront cost of the battery and the solar might be £6,000. But that's saving £800 per year for that household, which is about an 8-year payback. But what we're working with sort of long term in people who want to invest in social responsibility and also get their money back eventually, that gives there's still enough money in the bill saving and of that £800 to be shared to pay back those investors within the non-profit model, and then any surplus that is generated beyond that can then be reinvested in new low carbon technologies, making it cheaper in the long run. So the idea is it's a kind of self-perpetuating model.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that's a good kind of like quantification. It's good to quantify sometimes what those benefits are, because we hear a lot of different stories about it being expensive or less expensive, but there's still clearly some upfront investment needed. That brings me quite nicely onto Benga, to bring you in, because I guess you are in this finance kind of like angle. So Benga, can you introduce yourself and Celix Wills in a bit more detail and what it does?
Yes, no, perfect. Hi everyone, so I'm Benga Adinaike. So I work at Salix Finance, so we're a non-departmental public body. So we're working with UK government, Welsh government and Scottish government to deliver grant and loan funding to support the net zero agenda. So like you said, Ben, so yeah, working on the finance side, so in terms of funding these low carbon energy efficiency and renewable projects. And I work specifically in the Wales team, so manage the loan funding scheme. So there's the Wales funding program, which has been delivered for the last, I think, 16 years now. And also there's the Degarbon scheme aimed at universities and colleges. So essentially managing the funding to support all of those kind of renewable technologies and kind of that net zero agenda. And so we get quite a variety of kind of different projects, from replacing LED lighting in schools to kind of like large 2.9 million value, like solar farms, kind of generate a lot of financial savings, like Andy was mentioning, which can then be reinvested and kind of saved by the public sector to then invest in future kind of improvements.
Yeah. So how does your organization like interact with Development Bank for Wales, for example, Business Wales, all those kind of parties that have some form of a role to play within kind of helping businesses, but access some of those financial kind of support mechanisms. So how do you fit within that ecosystem, Benga?
So we don't have direct partnership with Business for Wales. Our direct partnership is with government, so working directly with Welsh Government and the public sector organisations. So those that are eligible to apply, so like schools, local authorities, health boards. The schemes are designed to reduce kind of carbon emissions and kind of get financial savings within the public sector buildings. That's kind of our main target, and that's the kind of portfolio of work that we kind of sit within. So it's kind of reducing the emissions from the public sector. So unfortunately, yeah, we don't currently work with private organisations and companies, but it's mostly for
Okay.
achieving the public savings.
How do you then work with the communities then, Benga? Because I guess there is a strong interaction, I guess, with some of the public sector projects that you're financing and in the local community surrounding those projects. So how does that work with you and your organisation?
So we work closely with Welsh Government and the Energy Service, who's like a partner, and essentially they kind of like people that helps kind of support the development of these projects. So they have close links with the local authorities looking to apply for this pot of funding, and then we also join in those conversations and helping them to understand what funding is available and how we can help support them to kind of build those applications that they can then finance through the Wales Funding Programme loan scheme or the Degarbon scheme. So we kind of work in terms of organisations coming with ideas in terms of what projects they want to deliver based on their net zero heat decarb strategies. And then we'll have those conversations to kind of build that application and then essentially go on along the funding route, how they're going to access the funding, kind of some of the key requirements in terms of reporting, as they kind of go through that project delivery, and then also kind of supporting them on that journey to kind of completing those projects and then looking at, wider areas in terms of what can be achieved further down the line.
Yeah, and my understanding is that you guys do very strongly track also the performance and do a lot of assessment pre and after. Can you explain a bit more how that process works and why it's so important for your organization to do so?
Yes, so when it comes to an application, we want to understand the projected kind of energy savings and the financial savings from the project. So understanding if you're going to install like solar PV arrays, air source heat pumps, what's based on quotations, how much it's going to cost. We're looking at the financial feasibility of the project as well, and kind of understanding what the pounds per ton of carbon is going to be saved. So we kind of have a set threshold to make sure it is financially feasible and doable for the organization. And also assessing the projected savings they're predicting from the project. And then when you get into delivery, get the funding, you complete the project a year or two down the line, we then ask kind of for like that final application form to kind of confirm whether those savings were actually achieved. And then that kind of is fed into Welsh Government's net zero reporting that all public sector organisations are required to do. And it's very important in terms of getting access to that data, kind of doing the monitoring verification, just so that it kind of helps with future kind of investment calls and kind of understanding key areas of like what the actual carbon savings were and kind of what's actually being delivered in the public sector, kind of where there's room to kind of grow, what needs to improve, and then kind of target funding in specific areas if need to be based on that information that's collected.
Good. And can you give me an example, as similar as with Andy, or can we give of a particular project that comes to your mind, which like has stuck to your mind? Say this is where we had a huge impact to date, and we've seen actually some further really good kind of benefits flowing out of that particular project. Can you give an example of a project?
Yeah, no,
What
exactly.
it has also realized?
So Aberystwyth University, so 3 years ago, they applied for support from the Welsh Funding Programme. So it was a large solar PV farm, 2.9 million was the total cost, and then they used some internal kind of funding to support that. So there was 4,500 solar panels kind of installed at the site at their Penglas campus. And the overall project is generating roughly £325,000 worth of financial savings, which then the university can retain and then reducing their bills, and they can reinvest that however they want into other future projects. But then also it generates 25% of the current electricity demand of their campus. So it's actually saving quite a lot in terms of the financial cost, but also actually powering their sites. And so hopefully, I think they're planning to do some future works as well to kind of build upon that. But that's kind of like one of our like flagship projects that, you know, we've helped support the last couple of years, and it's one that really does kind of stand out in my mind as like a really successful one that has those kind of tangible benefits.
Yeah, and that energy security piece, and I think being self-sufficient, I think it comes out also in the project I think that Andy is running, but also I think from this example very clearly. And I think a lot of people, I think, will miss that. I think that kind of like that role of for example renewables, in particular renewable locally generated renewables in particular. And I've seen that in my previous life when I was at Welsh Water, where that increase in renewable and self-sufficiency actually maybe sometimes article if you take the cost of capital in, but not gives you an immediate significant savings as up to 5 to sometimes even 10 years or even plus payback times. But what it does do, and I think this is really important for the future, it does shield you from any future large cost kind of like spike. So anything we've seen had it called post Ukraine invasion in particular of these large kind of cost spikes and which affect business but also people's lives in particular is one of still of the I think one of the reasons why we still have this high cost of living. Energy is still up there now. We need it, that kind of increased self-sufficiency really is important to shield yourself from future cost spikes. And that's what we've seen when I was at Welsh Water also, which really, really filtered most of that kind of big additional cost out of the organization and makes it more resilient from a financial perspective and therefore also more sustainable in the long run. So Chris, now moving over to you. You in previous life has been in the finance world as well as a finance director and finance officer for the hydrogen the company. The name just simply forgets me. River Simple, that's the name is there, yeah. But now you're running your own company, Hippo Hydrogen Solutions. Would you be able to introduce yourself and explain a bit what Hippo does? And you've got some beautiful picture on the background as well. And seems like Miami, but it is Swansea, isn't it?
Yeah, thank you, Ben. Yeah, it's Miami, Wales. Yeah, no, thanks for the opportunity as well to be speaking today. And it's in the name really, Hippo Hydrogen Solutions. We're very much focused on hydrogen, and there's a really good reason why hydrogen needs to be a part of the mix, which I'll come on to in a second. But we're a for-profit company set up to grow the hydrogen economy by leading on the demand side. So as you know, as we're emerging into or growing the hydrogen economy, there is a need to create a lot of that demand. So people are looking for buyers or off-takers to create the investability for the hydrogen production. And so we are focused specifically on that demand side by looking to deliver transport and remote power that's run off of hydrogen. And to some of the other speakers' points, really what we're looking at is ensuring that we can generate and manifest the benefits locally for many reasons: A, cost; B, for the environment; and C, to ensure that people can buy in to the hydrogen economy as it starts to evolve. So we've been going for about just under 3 years. I think actually next week is our 3-year anniversary. So yeah, time flies by. But the purpose for the company is really to start driving the hydrogen economy out of just industry into the regular world that will start to impact everyday lives. We're running services because it's quite nascent. The infrastructure is not necessarily there for anyone to run out and get a hydrogen car at the moment. So we're trying to control that value chain to ensure it grows in a reasonable way that's sustainable. So we talked about, not just environmentally sustainable, but financially sustainable, to ensure everything comes along with it, like the training, like the skills, like the products, the innovation. And part of the building you see behind me, we're building out a hydrogen hub really in Neath Talbot to support businesses that want to move into this space and anchor them in South Wales, so Wales can get the benefit from all of the great research and innovation that that comes out of the universities. Why hydrogen? Well, I think it's not a silver bullet, but certainly it's key to ensuring some of the things you just mentioned around energy security are maintained. So if we're investing a lot into renewables and we're generating a lot, hydrogen can act as a really good storage mechanism, as a new route to market, but a way to store renewables to enable us to get more value out of renewables, scale the renewables up without having too much reliance on the grid not being able to handle it. I think hydrogen's really, really good at that. It's also a wonderful way for us to have an orderly transition, not just a just transition to keep things, cost effective, but an orderly transition so that you can, use hydrogen on its own as a fuel. You can use it to support your electrification, as well as a transition from fossil fuels. And I think that's really important to recognize, that we don't just pick a technology and try and go with it at all costs. It's too expensive and it alienates people, or it's just financially not doable. So I think hydrogen is this nice, very simple element, right? It's number one in the periodic table, that can be made from multiple sources, whether it's fossil fuel, bio products, electrolysis from water, and it can be made completely sustainably. So net zero is one thing. Sustainability is really, really important, which is why hydrogen is going to play a massive part globally in the future of our energy mix. And of course, because you can store it, you can have that energy security. Because you can manufacture it, you can have pricing security, and that's really, really important. So you can make sure you've got your own energy supply, but B, you can plan, into the future, aligned with renewables for like 20, 25 years, what your energy costs are going to be, possibly for your transportation, possibly for your peak power requirements, whatever it is. So that's why hydrogen, really. It doesn't mean we don't think other technologies are brilliant, but hydrogen sits there supporting other technologies. But it does need that focus on the demand side, so it can grow to create the bankability for the projects. So Benga, for example, will fund renewable projects that will go into making hydrogen.
Yeah, just got a quick, very topical question in the chat. I've not ignored all the others, so be reassured. But this is Chris, I think this is a very specific question. There's a question online, I think from Patrick, who says, "What's the best way of storing hydrogen?"
Yeah. So really, the best way of storing it, which means we're very, very successful, is in your vehicles. So I think it's well known now that after the petrol crisis, there's more storage of petrol in cars than there are in bunkers and whatever. So, as the demand grows, you will have that transient storage because you're going to be using it all the time. But, there's multiple ways to store it. And this is another beautiful thing about, the hydrogen pathways. You can put it into a liquid form like ammonia or methanol, and keeping it at a low-cost storage for a long period of time, easy to transport. You can store it as a compressed gas, which generally, hypohydrogen interacts with at different pressures, up to 1,000 bar. I mean, you can really cram a lot into some of these storage mechanisms. There's quite a lot of novel ways of storing it, things like metal hydrides, where you just use the chemical bond. And there's cheap ways of, releasing that. So it depends on the type of application. What I hope, that there's more transient storage because people are using it, but B, we can put it in the gas grid. So you can move it around in the gas grid. You can store a huge amount of energy in the gas grid. And whether you start blending hydrogen into the grid and eventually get to 100%, or happily sitting with a blend, and it's not the first time that has been done, before with syngas in London.
Or Towns gas, for that matter. Towns gas was a blend of methane and hydrogen. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and methane's a blend, right? It's carbon and hydrogen, and water's a blend. It's hydrogen and oxygen, and so you can store it. And I would say that's a storage mechanism. You store your water, that's your hydrogen right there, and you can use it at will and create the water when you use it through a fuel cell or combust it. So yeah, lots of different ways, but ideally you would store it in a way that's suitable for the application.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to mention that hydrogen is very, very important, particularly for decarbonizing of industry. So roughly 40% of the 16 million tons of emissions that are associated in South Wales, for example, but also up in North Wales, in the Northeast Wales, industrial decarbonization, Deeside and Wrexham, 40% of those emissions will be dependent on us utilizing hydrogen as a fuel switching mechanism, because for certain applications it's still deemed the only way to decarbonize those applications. And so it plays a really, really big role. So 14% of 16 million tons is quite a significant proportion, and it plays clearly also a role in decarbonizing transport, but also construction, mobile plant and those kind of things. So we will hopefully see a little bit more. But I think what's really exciting about Wales in particular is that I think it's becoming a really good test bed for hydrogen solutions, and becoming a real kind of ecosystem, particularly with the projects that have been given government funding, as well as the project you're running, as well as Protium, a University of South Wales in the south, but also up in Mentamorn. I actually had a discussion today with the team up there, and the exciting developments they're having in the port of Anglesey, and particularly linking it with tidal power. I think it's a very exciting place to be, Wales, from a hydrogen perspective, and it's really needed to get also some of the decarbonization solutions into rural Wales, where the electricity grid isn't strong enough to probably go for fully electrified solutions, and there is where hydrogen particularly plays also a really important role. I want to move on a little bit more on some of the kind of key topics, and one of the key things which I brought up in the kind of introduction was around innovation and skills development. And I quickly want to do a round robin here of the panelists about how do you, what's currently preventing, in your view, the innovation in your particular area, and also skills development, and particularly participation of communities, but also, I would say, minority groups in this. Because there was also a question in the chat from Candace about how do we can get a more underrepresented groups, BME, disabled, into green careers, and so if you can weave all those kind of things in your kind of like answer, that would be great. Who wants to go first?
Should I carry on?
Yeah, just go on, Chris. Yeah, your mic is still open. Let's go here.
While I'm on the subject, yeah. So really, what's really exciting for Wales is not just about the net zero and energy security. The real dividend for Wales is the jobs and the innovation that can come from this emerging technology. And I'm talking about hydrogen, but all renewables, because they work completely in tandem together. And as you're, deploying through necessity, which this is, all of a sudden you start to realize things can be improved quickly, whether it's the equipment or it's just the process, or so we're already innovating and developing new technologies, because as we're trying to move out of co-located big industry into the public domain, all of a sudden things aren't fit for purpose, and we're like, okay, well, we need to innovate something and create something which ideally then we'll manufacture in Wales, and ideally then we'll export globally, so we're having money coming in. I wanted to make a little bit of a parallel with a previous energy store, which is coal, in South Wales. And once we started tapping into that, the innovation, the jobs, and the agglomeration of the metallurgical industries around that power source was massive, and we're still feeling it, today. So I think if, again, we're going to focus on renewables and spend a lot of money on renewables, we've got to benefit from that. And that's got to come from jobs, innovation, know-how, which we can export around the world and get some payback for our investment.
And so what's further needed in your view in order to overcome some of the benefits? Because it's not visible to everybody yet. So if you go to certain further education colleges and they don't have visibility on what type of jobs are available, for example, in your kind of like industry. So what do you think is needed in order to overcome some of the barriers we've seen so far on this?
Yeah, so on the hydrogen side, there's not so many barriers, because a lot of the skills are there in the oil and gas and in the electrification side of things, but generally they haven't come together. So it's a case of really being able to come up with
Convene them. Yeah.
modules that will just sit there to say, this is how they integrate. We're developing our own project. We're looking at vertically integrating on site, where we have to bring in all sorts of professionals in health and safety and gas and electrification to work on a particular project, and quite quickly they pick it up and work on it. So I think there needs to be more, I suppose, courses that are designed to include areas of the emerging technologies. And I think the colleges are in a good position to do that. I think there's a lot of work gone into the jobs of the future, what sort of skills you need to have. I think they're gearing up. So I would say actually people are quite well prepared to move into it. What we have to do is create the jobs. So when you create the jobs and you get the investment, you can very quickly figure out how to train people and get those skills that you need. But it's, you need more employment opportunities for employers to engage with the colleges to say, look, we need some more apprenticeships. You have to make sure you're giving this sort of provision to your students in anticipation of moving into the hydrogen industry.
Thank you, Chris. Benga, do you have
Yeah.
anything that prevents currently innovation or skills development, and what you think the solutions might be to overcome those?
So in terms of kind of like skills development, on Chris's point around kind of like the colleges and kind of like the training, there does need to kind of be a boost in terms of the courses that are available for individuals to understand it. But one thing from what I've seen from one of the projects we've been supporting over the last year is with the Degarbon scheme that's aimed at the higher education, further education sectors. A key aspect that Welsh Government pushed in terms of the funding requirement was making sure that these projects had that kind of community engagement and the engagement with the kind of student bodies with these projects. And one of them that kind of stands in my mind is like Swansea University. They kind of had students kind of involved in terms of understanding the project that's going to be delivered on site. I think they kind of held like net zero decarbonisation kind of forums for that kind of like collaboration between the two, kind of helping them, that student body, understand kind of the heat decarbonisation journey that Swansea University is going on, to understand the technologies that are going to be in place. And I think that's kind of a very kind of insightful and very kind of practical way of getting the next generation involved in understanding the kind of like importance of this topic and kind of like help in terms of future, getting them interested in net zero and the kind of climate change agenda, kind of having them kind of almost like involved in those projects from like those early stages. I think that's kind of very important and kind of a key way to kind of making sure that we do have that kind of development and upskilling of kind of like the next generation and kind of going forward.
Yeah, I think there's a very good point there, Benga. I think we recently actually took on 3 placement students 1 year prior to them doing and finishing off their A-levels. And that we did that through Techniquest, and it was really great to have those 3 individuals with complete different backgrounds actually working with us. But it gave them a bit of a taste for what working life in this kind of area would look for. And I think that early engagement, I think, and giving them specific project, I think, is a really good way of doing that. Anything else, Benga?
I think, sorry, lost my train of thought. In terms of
sorry,
the
did
innovation
I do that?
aspect,
Apologies.
no worries. In terms of the innovation aspect, I think coming from like the funding angle, again, we're kind of just seeing new ways in terms of people trying to tackle the problem. So like with kind of building fabric, which is like a key factor as part of a net zero journey, making sure that, the buildings are thermally performing and you're not losing heat in certain areas. But one client is using like Welsh wool, for instance, and like make sure that they're using local suppliers. So that's another kind of example of an interesting way of kind of tackling that problem without having to, and making sure that, there's that local employment, people using local suppliers to support those projects. I think like back on Chris's point, kind of making sure that you are using the resources within Wales and not having to kind of import from elsewhere, and kind of keeping that within the Welsh economy. I think that's also kind of a key kind of source of innovation that I've kind of seen recently. I think it's just kind of new ways in which people need to think in terms of how to kind of achieve their kind of net zero strategy and agenda.
Good, thank you. Andy, anything from your perspective on innovation and skills development and about what's preventing that from happening and not sufficient enough to meet, for example, the needs in Mid Wales, for example?
Yeah, certainly. And I think it's really right that those questions are asked together, because if all the innovation comes from the same people all the time, then we're not going to get to the bottom of the net zero and decarbonisation problem. So it's really important to be bringing new people into the industry and new innovators into the industry from different backgrounds. I see Candice's question around young people and people from different communities. So there's a real need to address the engagement challenge, and that can be based around language. And something I think is really important and something that's working well so far in Mid Wales is making sure that it's local trusted people with the training. So it's not people coming from outside the communities and people from ivory towers, as it were, coming up with the innovations and engineers in a boardroom. It's really ensuring that it's people with the innovation are coming from the communities, because they know the challenges that those communities are experiencing. And for example, in Mid Wales, we're working with Newtown College to try to come up with innovative ways of engaging with young people. We've designed a little game as well for primary school children around energy efficiency, which is a virtual reality walking around the home type thing where school kids can go in, and it's a bit like I mean, I don't play them myself, but it's a bit like Minecraft apparently, or Roblox. So yeah, you go in and you click on buttons and it asks a question, and you top up your decarbonisation totometer and things like that, and you've got to find all the things that you can do and install a smart meter or install a heat pump. You can jump on a trampoline onto the roof and install solar panels and things like that. So yeah, I think the innovation and engagement are really important. And then there's language challenges as well, making sure that there's people with the skills. Or another example is says there's pluses and minuses for digital solutions, but one good thing about digital is it can be easily converted into different languages. So the Fairer Warmth app that we're utilizing to engage people in the Harvest project has been language converted to Welsh firstly, and also Polish, because they're the two most prevalent non-English languages spoken in the area. And that's similar of course, there's lots of other communities with different languages being spoken. So yeah, it's important to have any of the information accessible to different people, and then those people hopefully then become champions within those communities.
Yeah, and I think that language, and particularly the Welsh language, and particularly around the jargon surrounding net zero, I think is something we picked up in Prif as well, even working with colleagues who are Welsh speakers, first language in some cases, and find it difficult, for example, to do an interview with BBC or ITV talking about their project because they don't really know the terminology in Welsh. And we picked that up actually recently, and on our website www.netzeroindustry.wales, we actually have a glossary available that actually translates in English and Welsh and vice versa, I call typical net zero terms. So if you're ever stuck, just go to our website, because it's already available, and I've been told that BBC and others are using it nowadays, because it makes it very easier to actually translate. And if there's anything missing, let us know. I will add it to the glossary, and we can build up that kind of expertise, because it's not easy to always translate that. The other important thing, I think, on skills, I think we need to also really appreciate that actually net zero skills and green skills are not necessarily different skills that we're already teaching. And I think some of the barriers I think we've seen is that people are waiting for clarity about what it actually means, a net zero job or a green skill. And what it effectively should be told is that this actually is the same skills we should be teaching about training electricians, welders, people that do environmental assessments, planning jobs, all of that stuff all needs to be done, but only with a slight different context. And that is the kind of the net zero kind of context. And I think it's really important that we stop talking in isolation on green skills. I think we really need to see this as a large construction program where we need more people in order to benefit the most from the social value that those investments are actually going to bring to Wales. And we need more people to operate, maintain, design, and build and construct all of these kind of assets. And I think it's a really important part. I just want to move quickly because I think we're already 45 minutes into this session and we still have a couple of questions. Candice, role models on BME, disabled, and green careers. I think one of the primary go-tos I would say is professional bodies and professional institutes. So IMECI, Energy Managers Association, IChemI, all of them will have a really good set of role models that can help with that. Also STEM ambassadors within organizations. So large organizations will have STEM ambassadors. But particularly around this topic, I also put it in the chat. There's a lady called Bernie Davis, who's a real role model on EDI within Wales. I have the pleasure of sitting with her on the Business in Focus board. And she's really inspiring, but also enthusiastic around this particular topic. So if there's one person I usually go to and have a chat to is Bernie on that one. There's also questions specifically for Andy and Benga. I don't know who wants to go first, but what's the smallest project size you would look at and how would you see standardized aggregation models evolving? Not so sure whether I fully understand the last one, but maybe you could go on the first one about what's the smallest project we would look at from an organization. Who wants to go first?
I can go, Benga, if you like.
Yeah.
So on the smallest project, I guess the short answer would be one house, but that's not the ideal situation. So where I say that in terms of going back to the harvest project, there is benefits already of installing solar battery solutions, and the payback period is not long. So it can, but obviously affordability is an issue, and that's where it leads on to the second part of the question, which is the aggregation. And if there is enough demand for those assets, then because the cost has gone down, and I did see another question around the cost of energy storage, the cost of battery and solar technologies is going down. It's gone down a lot. So if you're good at scaffolding, actual solar panels only cost about £60 to £100 each. It's the work around installing them that costs some money. So whereas batteries can be installed by any electrician, and there are a lot of companies that will charge a lot of money for batteries, but if you're actually looking at the cost of those technologies, they're only, depending on the size of the battery, between sort of £1,000 and £2,500, and they can save lots of, quite combined a lot of money each year. So when you look at an aggregation model, things like bulk purchasing combined with the virtual power plants and bring in the flexibility benefits, as well as sharing the benefits of the savings, that's when it becomes an investable model that can lead to no upfront cost, meanwhile generating community benefits as well. And what we really hope for the Harvest project is that can be the kind of the first project that really proves that model, so it can become kind of eternally scalable across Wales. And as soon as you crack it for one community, and if you start doing it in different parts, then we're working with the local flexibility markets and helping SPEN reduce their constraints on the networks. But if we had the virtual power plant in such a way that it's non-profit and community benefiting across the whole of Wales, then you can start interacting with the national energy markets, and you have hundreds of megawatts, gigawatts of energy flexibility, and suddenly it becomes a really good thing that brings the energy costs down, meanwhile helps the transition.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. And Benga, do you have anything to add to that?
So in terms of kind of like the smallest project size that we accept for some of the funding schemes, so like for one of the typical like loan funding, it's like around £5,000, like the smallest, and essentially it's just making sure that the applications have kind of public sector buildings that are non-domestic, is aimed at non-domestic buildings, and it's ensuring that essentially the financial returns that you're going to get and generate through those projects are retained by the public sector. So essentially, yeah, typically £5,000 the absolute minimum, but there is no cap in terms of like the maximum application that you could apply for to kind of support those projects. And in terms of that funding model, so with the loan funding in Wales, there is kind of like interest applied to it, but essentially the savings generated from your projects should be used in a way that the savings you get from those projects to pay back that interest, and then essentially, and that's up to like 10 years, it can be less. Essentially going forward, essentially that organization then retains all those project savings going forward, and then that can then just be used to go to internal budgets used elsewhere, or to kind of fund other kind of future projects.
Thank you, Benga. I think there's also a question about potential fire risk, and also there's still the one open about are there cheaper types of batteries, but I'm just conscious of time, and I just want to, I think we'll really go for each panel member, if possible, to talk around, I think, what success would look like in their mind, I think, in 2030, 2050, if everything goes smoothly and well, and what's keeping them driving. So what's the kind of goal with 2030, 2050? Chris, you first of all. What would good look like for you?
Of course, it includes hydrogen, Ben. You know that. But so I would say that we'd see a mixture of zero emission vehicles on the road, all types of modes of transport. To be honest with you, running on hydrogen, electric, or hybrids. And I think hybrids for transport is the future. There's lots of reasons why, but again, mix in the benefits of hydrogen, the lightweightness and the quick fill times and the long range with electrification. Things a really good balance there. So I think all vehicles should be on the road. Lots of hydrogen refueling everywhere, hydrogen in the gas grid, supporting the electricity grid, taking the strain off of that as part of microgrids, working with solar, working with batteries. So to me, I think you see a lot of technologies, a lot of know-how, a lot of innovation and jobs coming out of Wales in particular, so that we're leading the world in this space, and it becomes wealth creation, not just a cost.
Thank you, Chris. Andy?
Yeah. So for me, it's about participation. As I mentioned in the introduction, net zero can't happen, and even if it does, it won't be beneficial unless everybody is brought along the way and on the journey. So yeah, for me, it's all about participation, upskilling, and people feeling like they're involved in a movement, rather than the benefits staying with the big energy companies and the wealthy people who already are taking themselves off grid and things like that.
Thank you, Andy. I think for Benga, can you hear us now? I do. If you have some interest, Benga? No, he can't hear us. Okay, he's still out of sound at the moment. So apologies for that. I will see if I can pose the question in the chat, whether he can open up and everything else. So from my perspective, I think I'm bringing it a bit more at a higher level. I think what I would like to see by 2030 is significant investment coming to Wales that is aligned with actually making us more a leading nation in clean energy transition. Really building, as I said earlier, and start on the kind of role that Milford Haven, but also other parts of Wales already playing as a key energy provider into Wales, but also wider UK. But more importantly, we see then also manufacturing and other kind of like businesses grow alongside of that kind of like energy production, because that's where I see currently all of the investment taking place, in an area where we have an abundance of low carbon energy at cost competitive prices on the doorstep, and that creates those thriving ecosystems. And that's what I would like to see by 2030, in particular, that we have actually a significant transformational levels of investment coming to Wales. Because I think without that, and really without actually seeing that investment coming through, I think it will still be very difficult to enthuse people, and particularly younger generation, that there is a future for them to actually learn and earn in their local kind of area where they live. And I think investment is key to actually not only create the jobs now, but also for generations to come. And that is what I think Wales has been lacking in recent years, and particularly decades, ever since the closure of the coal mines in particular, is that level of investment. And this green industrial transformation across whatever sector that is the case, I think will provide a real opportunity to for Wales to reinvent itself and actually create that kind of economic prosperity. But that requires a lot of investment to take place, and that's why it's great to hear from Benga, but also from Andy and from Chris about what's already happening. But this needs to go up multiple levels if we want to really get in that space. And 2030, I think, is a really key milestone for this, because if we don't reach that key level investment and that upward kind of curve of investment, then I think we will probably lose a lot of businesses further, and we see further deindustrialization, which has been the core of how we achieved a lot of the kind of like emissions reductions to date. And this is not what we want to see going forward. And if we want to have a prosperous Wales, we need to make sure that we keep on that industry here and grow it, rather than see it further dissipate from our local communities. So that's, for me, I think, a big focus. Benga, do you got the sound back? What's your kind of future hope, and what's your kind of key goal you're working towards by 2030?
Yes, sorry, apologies for that sounds back. So by 2030 and 2050, ideally in terms of like the public sector buildings, trying to kind of cut as much of the emissions that they currently produce as possible, to kind of reach that 2030 target, because I know Wales has that ambition to reach, kind of achieve net zero, especially in the public sector by then, and that will involve kind of a mixture of kind of electrification of vehicles, so having the fleets across, all across the public sector, but then also kind of a great real push in terms of those kind of low carbon heating systems, so development of heat networks across large parts of Wales, but also kind of installing those vast renewable energy technologies, and kind of how we discussed those, using those innovations as well, kind of make sure to kind of drive and achieve as far as we can for net zero along that journey. But I also think a key aspect is the investment. More investment is needed, both from the public sector, but also the private sector, to kind of fund that gap, because you do see it sometimes where there isn't enough funding to support all of these projects. So I think that's where private investment can kind of help to close that gap, kind of make sure that we'll stay on track. So yeah, that's my quick, wrap up for, yeah.
I'm glad you managed to get back in and listen to some of that come back in, so that's great. So it leaves me then to really close this particular section, and actually really key thing just to enthuse and hopefully inspire everybody here on the call today and on this event to really think about, I think, what role they could play in that. And I really would like to encourage people to start, actually, even if it's not part of your daily life, not part of your business, think about what kind of small actions you could take. And I often say, I think the kind of journey to net zero is like climbing Mount Everest. Yeah, you're not going to do that tomorrow, unprepared, untrained, and you start jumping on an airplane. You go to Nepal and actually start that journey to net zero. The first thing what we all need to do is prepare for base camp, just getting into that kind of early stages. That's already a challenge on its own. 5,500 meters. You wouldn't do that unprepared either. But I think these easy earlier steps, I think, are needed to do that. So, for example, about how you can reduce your fossil fuel use in your businesses. How can you actually think about energy efficiency? How can you tap into some of the kind of schemes that are available through Business Wales, Development Bank for Wales, but also in the public sector through Salix? I think these earlier steps, I think, are really good ways of entering to. The other important thing to mention is that we need to also be very glad that we're in Wales, because Wales is a nation where we're very closely connected. There are only 1 to 2 degrees of separation. There will be always somebody in your network that can actually know somebody who can help out with these things. So don't try to reinvent the wheel. Really tap into this Welsh network as much as you can and make use of that. Because I think if we can't make net zero happen in Wales, in my view, we can't make it happen anywhere, because it's all about collaboration, partnership, sharing of risks. And if you can make that possible by using your own networks, then I'm sure that with only 1 or 2 degrees of separation, you will know somebody that knows Andy, that knows Chris, that knows Benga, or myself, and that will help you on your journey to net zero. So on that kind of end, I would really like to thank Benga, Chris, and Andy for the participation today and their input. Very much appreciated. And I will then close out just before 3 o'clock, and hopefully you found it incredibly useful. Thank you very much. Diolch fawr.
Thank you.